as black and white threw anything they could find at the police crouched behind their riot shield.
300 arrests were made, that the situation turned ugly.
The clattering and banging of bricks and stones on helmets and shields was mixed with shouts and yells.
Wielding batons charged directly at a group of people standing outside the...
2 nights of the most violent urban strife seen in Britain this century.
During the summer of 1981, over 40 English towns were rocked by a series of riots. The most violent was in Liverpool, where 500 people were arrested, 1,000 police injured, £11 million worth of property was looted and destroyed. What has never been told is how a series of incidents in Toxteth, home to Liverpool's small black community, escalated into the worst civil disturbance this century. This is the story of that event. A riot which almost destroyed Liverpool and threw the government into turmoil.
They were stopping cars, they were hijacking cars, they had total control of that section. They put a roadblock, they stopped vehicles, turned them over, and they put a roadblock on the corner. And all the time I'm saying to them, look, the police are going to come any time and clear it. But the police never came.
We drove down into Upper Parliament Street and almost immediately came under a barrage of bricks. I can remember that the noise was absolutely unbelievable. The bricks were hitting the vans. We very quickly did a U-turn and came back out. Then it dawned on you what was happening. You know, this was something really serious that was building up.
Liverpool was a very, very frightening place to be. And you could only cover the story from one side. You could only cover the story from behind the police lines. Because the rioters, who were black and white people, were taking no prisoners.
Two or 300 at least immediately in front of us, probably more. Mixed race. And as I say, the petrol bombs, bricks, paving stones, and everything else were being thrown at us.
Although it was frightening, it was very surreal. I just remember the noises and the different smells and the women screaming. Late at night, there was a lot of tear gas, so everyone's eyes were streaming, but there was a lot of smell of blood. Have you ever smelled blood when it's wet?
If the riots had turned right off Upper Parliament Street, instead of carrying on, the rioters would have taken the police headquarters, and there was very little to stop them going on to go into the city.
The riots were centered on a deprived area of the city called Toxteth, a racially mixed district about 2 miles square. Its social problems were well known to the council.
Conditions were so bad in the Toxteth area. In every way, they were labelled by the city planners as the sin bin for the city, where they dumped all the people they didn't want.
That was the mentality that existed from the top of the council at that time, right throughout the council, say, just dump them into Liverpool 8. And it became a dumping ground. And people would say, all right, put a ring fence around it, you've got all your problems there, you can sort them all out, send a few social workers in, and if it gets out of hand, send the heavy mob in with the police.
By 1980, things had got out of hand. Relations between the young people of Toxteth and many outside agencies were fraught with tension. none more so than that with the police.
It was almost like two gangs, if you like. There was a local black community who were trying to get on with their lives, and then there was this other group, which in this case happened to be the police, who seemed to be intent on making life as difficult as they could for everybody in the area.
Life was already difficult enough. A collapsing local economy, endemic discrimination in the job market, 52% of young black people out of work. The country was in deep recession, and Toxteth felt especially hard hit.
Go to any factory in this city, how many blacks do you employ? Almost none.
When I say I'm from Liverpool, they've said to me, have you got any colour in you or something like that? And that's just happened a few times there.
Study after study has shown that the rates of black youth unemployment is 2 or 3 times as high as the white community. So there is a very severe problem of racial discrimination.
By 1980, there were clear warning signs of growing unrest.
Because all the youths round here, right, they're going to get sick and they can't get jobs. They're all going to team up together. And they're going to go on a rampage, over the city and take over. That's what's going to happen.
The young and unemployed in Liverpool found themselves the target of a tough new law and order drive.
We had a period here in Liverpool where the police used to go around in Land Rovers, it's called a task force, and they would pick on anybody. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white, particularly in the city centre. They'd haul them into the magistrate's court, and people would come in there with their eyes blacked and so on.
Facing a growing problem of street crime, the police had resorted to widespread stop-and-search tactics, using the so-called sus laws. Sus was hated, particularly by young black men, who regularly found themselves its target. In Liverpool late, stop-and-search became a source of fear and loathing.
When young people would come out the youth club on a disco night, there'd be 2 or 3 other young people. And more than on occasion, he said to me, will you just watch me while I walk across the boulevard? Because there's a police jeep parked on the boulevard. Just check me when I walk past it so I don't get no problem. Now, the police are there to protect young people. Here's young people asking me to stand on the corner and watch them while they walk across the road past the police vehicle so they don't get no hassle.
By 1981, policing was causing concern, even amongst those who weren't its target.
The Chief Constable said, they are a criminal community and I will police them accordingly, which meant I will use force to enforce order. Local people, anybody who lived in Toxteth, so resented it that I came to the conclusion there was no option but for them to use force in reply.
The man most responsible for this policy was Kenneth Oxford. Liverpool had a tradition of hardline police chiefs, and Kenneth Oxford was no exception. Ironically, he'd been given the brief of improving relations between the police and the city. Months after his death, questions still remain as to his suitability for this task.
He was a Metropolitan Police officer, and he was a detective. And to be quite honest, I never thought a long period of service in the CID was the best experience for dealing with sensitive public order issues. It's a different kind of work, so I think he was a bit of a disadvantage there.
The thing about Ken Oxford was he was a great chief constable if you were a policeman, and a bloody awful chief constable if you were a civilian in Liverpool. He was arrogant, he was unpolitical. He never tried to play the political game.
During the late 1970s and early 80s, Kenneth Oxford's police officers dramatically increased the rate of stop and search. This further sharpened the tension between the police and the young of Toxteth. By 81, it was no longer just young blacks who felt the pressure of the Chief Constable's approach.
My mother was still alive at that time. She would have told you a story if she was alive. It was the day she was called the breeder of mongrels by Mr. Oxford's police force. And that changed her for life. She now started to understand what was going on, because there's a law-abiding citizen, never been in trouble ever in her life, never had reason to talk to the police ever in her life, and suddenly is abused on her own doorstep, not by one police person, by 10 or 20 of them.
To start a fire, there must first be a spark. The antagonism between the police and one man and his family was to provide that spark. Lester Cooper's 4 sons were regularly stopped and picked up by the police. In 1979, Lester lodged a formal complaint.
Lester complained about the way that his son had been treated, and until that, Lester had never had any dealings with the police at all. After making that complaint, he suddenly found himself being stopped in his car, to my recollection, about 16 times within 12 to 24 months, I think. Always by officers from the same police station, always on the pretext of wanting to see his documentation. It was basically harassment.
I come to think that it's, grudge against because I've made a complaint, and this is why the police are doing this to me, because I've never had nothing to do with the police before, previous.
As a last resort, Lester turned to the local Community Relations Council.
You asked me when he came to the CRC. Here's the ironic thing. Mr. Cooper arrives there telling stories about his kids being beaten up and arrested and being racially abused, and eventually ends up on the same premises over a period of time saying it's now happening to him.
It tore my family apart. Right now, my kids, they don't even come and visit me because of all the hassle that I had with that and the police. Yeah, it tore me apart. I'm living here now. I'm on my own. I've got one girl here with me. I've got a daughter living with me here.
As I broke him, I saw Mr. Cooper fighting on his feet. As a father, trying to keep his children out of trouble, at that stage, and he lost the battle, really.
In July of 1981, Liverpool would reap the consequences of Lester Cooper's defeat. After 3 years of continual harassment, the arrest of his eldest son, Leroy, pushed the city over the brink. Liverpool wasn't the only city where tensions were running high. In April 1980, the St. Paul's district of Bristol exploded in a riot. A year later, Brixton erupted over 2 days, leaving at least 100 injured and 170 arrested. The Conservative government appointed Lord Scarman to investigate the causes of the Brixton riots. In Liverpool, a police crackdown on nightclub violence set the scene for the confrontation.
we could identify the day it would happen. Friday night was the day that young people went to town for a night out. One after another, the police closed the clubs where the young people gathered until there was only one left, the Jacaranda. And we warned them, if you close the Jacaranda, that will cause trouble. And sure enough, they closed the Jacaranda, and lo and behold, the pot boiled over.
On Friday, July the 3rd, Leroy Cooper was arrested while out riding a borrowed motorbike.
When the police see the bike along Princess Road, the police want to stop the lad. The lad didn't stop. He went straight into Grumble Street. When he went into Grumble Street, the police come down, overpower him, beat his hand off the bike and overpower him and throw him in a van.
The riots in Bristol and Brixton had both started with badly managed arrests in public places. With Leroy Cooper's arrest, the Merseyside force made that same mistake.
There was 3 police vans. The police had one of the Coopers in the van, and there was groups of young people all around, and there was a motorbike parked by there. So I started negotiating with the police. What's the problem? Why are you arresting him? Why are all these police here? Why is there 3 vans and about 20 police for one guy on a motorbike?
Leroy was pulled from the van by the crowd, which then fought with the police for 2 hours before dispersing. This was the start of the Toxteth riot. Events were now slipping out of control.
Okay, there was a bit of a fracas that day. It was the next day that opened everybody's eyes. The so-called riot. When buildings were burnt and people en masse actually fought with the authorities. The spark was spontaneous.
On July 4th, 1981, the day after Leroy Cooper's bungled arrest, events in Liverpool began to spiral out of control. Many of those pouring into Liverpool late that evening knew nothing of what had triggered the riot the day before. They'd come to settle their own scores.
Hundreds of white people started converging into the community, about 5, 6 in the evening. And I'm talking hundreds, and they were carrying sticks, iron bars, all kinds of manner of weapons. They had balaclavas with them. They'd come to join up with the black youth. And what they were saying was within their own communities, they suffer the same assault and the same brutality. The only thing is, they don't get called nigger.
I went out and had a few drinks with a few friends to a party. I was coming home about 11:30 at night, I think. And all the riots was going on, all throwing pestle bombs and missiles. So I walked past the police, cut cordons and walked over, seen all my friends from the area, all involved. And I just helped them to do, basically, what they was doing.
The violence escalated to levels not seen before on mainland Britain. By midnight, the rioters were in control of the streets of Toxteth and had set up barricades at major intersections.
I was relieved that a lot of people weren't dead because the violence was just untamable. And it was not indiscriminate violence thrown here, there, or anywhere. It was directed at what they seen the tool of the establishment, the police force. And it was a pitched running battle with that unit and no other.
In the early hours of Sunday, July the 5th, with the rioting entering its third day, increasingly desperate police officers attempted to reclaim the streets.
It would be about 2 o'clock in the morning when a decision was made that an attempt was going to be made to clear the barricade at Mulgrave Street. And as soon as we formed any form of a static line, we come under a hail of bricks. And the order was given to march up forwards and take that junction, basically. In that first 5-minute move up towards that main junction, 15 officers were hospitalised. And it was then that it started to dawn on us that there was people out there who were trying to kill us. There was genuine fear, and that's what they felt. You know, there's people out there. If I fall over now, someone is going to kill me.
You'd have rows and rows of police standing there with the big shields, and they were banging, like really revving themselves up, you know, like, and they were really frightened, really pumped up, and the sweat were pouring, and they were frightened, and they were hiding behind the shields.
They were forming up in lines behind each other, and I'm talking maybe 15, 20 thick. And what everybody was doing is they were all running over to these piles of bricks, getting all these bricks, and then there'd be in these lines, and then someone would give an instruction, and the first row of people would all together, be about 20 across, would all let loose at the police. They'd drop down and split, and the next group would come forward, and the same, and it was continuous.
Merseyside police, overwhelmed from the start by the ferocity of the attacks, including rioters driving the mechanical digger, sent for reinforcements from neighbouring forces. They fared little better.
There was a fairly substantial pitch of petrol bombs, and I was at the back of the shields, and this bomb came over the top and landed behind me, and all of a sudden I was dancing around in flames. While I was bobbing about like Rudolf Nureyev, I saw him. I saw the fellow with the paving stone in front of me, and I saw it, my name on it, and I was looking which corner of the net to head it in, because we were dancing about a bit at the time, and it just went straight through my helmet into my head.
As the night drew on, other targets presented themselves.
This bank was ablaze. A bank was just burning out of control. This old building called the Rialto Buildings, all of it was ablaze. It was like a bomb had been dropped on it.
It didn't seem real. You'd watch people getting knocked over and people getting battered, but it wasn't real. You know, people were on the ground getting kicked, and the police were trying to drag somebody, and the crowd was dragging them back, and there was a milk float coming flying up the streets, and it was just, it wasn't real.
Fires started by rioters had spread along the buildings on Upper Parliament Street. They threatened to engulf a geriatric hospital. Neither the police nor the fire service could reach the scene.
The whole thing stopped from the rioters' point of view, and the evacuation of this building started under the implementation and under the guidance of the rioters. Get these people out.
They wouldn't have any police there. They allowed so many ambulance men there, and they rode shotgun on so many ambulances. And we evacuated that hospital of 100 people in 25 minutes with the help of the people that were on the disturbance side.
The rioters felt it was a mark of their honour that their fight wasn't with old people in an old people's home. Their fight was with the police. And the whole thing was adjourned until the very last person was moved out.
Yeah, it was weird. It was like a gentleman's standoff, only there was no gentleman involved, right? And they helped all the elderly out, and once the building was secured, they left 2 or 3 men on the door so no one would go in and loot it. And they continued fighting.
By the third day of continuous rioting, the authorities were suffering casualties faster than replacements could be found. Almost by accident, the police happened upon a tactic that worked. They used their vehicles to go on the offensive.
I run from the road, then a police Land Rover chased me and ran me against the wall. I collapsed to the floor. The police just grabbed me by 2 arms and dragged me like 300 yards and threw me in the back of a police van.
Paul Conroy's back was broken in this incident. Police armed with pump-action shotguns were now seen on the streets of Toxteth. In addition, for the first time outside Northern Ireland, tear gas was fired against civilian rioters. No warnings were issued. Those like Phil Robbins, hit by the tear gas rounds, were severely injured.
His back was to me, but all this smoke was oozing from somewhere about here, and he was screaming. And as I went to approach him from behind, because he's turned to me and he's holding himself, an invisible fist again in the back of him, you know, you just seen his pad and clothes going here, and I heard this thud.
Kenneth Anderson, out looking for a late-night drink, also became a casualty.
There were big CS gas capsules with fins on the back, about that long actually, and they were designed for the situation where there was a siege, and they were designed to be fired through a window into a room where there was a siege, to hit the wall and explode CS gas, so people would have to leave. But these were actually fired directly at people, and one of them was fired at Kenneth Anderson, went into his groin and exploded in his groin.
You've got to remember, you've got police here, and you've got people throwing bricks and bottles and petrol bombs, and here's this lone black man, right? And he's there banging on the window, and they're like telling him you're not getting in because they're not opening the door. And he's here and he's saying to the police, "It's not fucking fighting. You stop throwing a fucking brick. I want to get a drink. You won't let me in while you're fighting." And they shot him.
It just looked like he'd been blown away. All she'd see of this person was a load of blood. Do you know what I mean? He just appeared to be covered. I mean, I think he had a red sweater on, a red jumper. I never did find out whether that was true, but he just appeared to me as a massive red.
The surgeon who operated on him removed the pieces, and they made almost a full piece of one of these capsules that was like that.
37 tear gas rounds were fired and 11 rioters were seriously hurt. The injured included a relative of Lester Cooper.
It's the drink that saved that man for the rest of life, for the rest of the time that he lived. He must have lived about 7 years after that, or
Yeah, I think that's how long after he left. He was shot in his groin. His groin was mashed up. He was walking with stick for months.
By the end of 3 days of rioting, Toxteth was devastated. "150 buildings had been destroyed. Nearly 800 police were injured. There had been over 500 arrests, with more than 1,000 reported crimes. Lord Scarman's inquiry into the Brixton riot was widened to take in Toxteth and other riot-torn areas. The government was feeling vulnerable.
There was panic in the Tory government. They'd already seen riots in London. They'd seen riots in St. Paul's before Toxteth took off. So if you had any sense, you knew that there was potential. It was summer, it could be a long, hot summer. William Whitelaw came up, and Oxford deliberately drove him from the airport right through Toxteth to make sure Whitelaw saw what was going on and what had happened. Cars were left in the streets, burned out, buildings were burned out. There was no attempt to clean the area up before Whitelaw got there. Now, William Whitelaw had been a soldier. William Whitelaw had been a man who'd witnessed, I think, all sorts of violence. And he was shocked by what he saw. And that message got straight to Margaret Thatcher.
The following Monday morning, I get a telephone call. This is Downing Street. The Prime Minister had just left Downing Street on the way to Liverpool. Please make all arrangements for her visit.
I saw policemen's helmets when we went to the police station smashed in at the top, and I saw spikes taken off the top of railings which had been used, and there was clearly an incredible viciousness. And I'm afraid I formed a very strong impression that the Thatcher government was being put to the test by those people who wished to bring it down.
On the 13th of July, 10 days after the bungled arrest of Lester Cooper's son, Mrs. Thatcher came to Liverpool Town Hall. A meeting had been hastily arranged with councillors, community activists and local groups. It was reported that she spoke more than she listened.
She just laid into them about financial figures, how much the government had given, how much the city council had given. And basically she was saying to him and his others, how dare you allow these people to uprise? That was and she was being really, really offensive. And these people were just saying, yes, Mom, yes, Mom.
Say that. A number of them say that there's great mistrust. And I have said to them and will continue to say, the law must be upheld. Whatever mistrust there is, we must try to get rid of it. And that is a two-way business. But there is no future for any society unless the law...
I don't think she understood what we were talking. I don't think she understood the situation. I mean, I don't think she really understood what Liverpool 8 is, the difficulties young black people face.
And I was sat there watching it. And I just looked at him and went, yo, Maggie, eyes locked onto me like an insist, just, and her neck come forward, and she says, "And who are you?" So I introduced myself, and she was glaring at me because I'd said, "Yo, Maggie," and I just pointed out to her, "We're basically not here about money. We're not here about unemployment and poor housing. We're here about a race issue."
The Prime Minister refused to accept any criticism of the police, especially allegations of racism. Comments by police authority members, whose task it was to make the police publicly accountable, received a harsh reception.
Chairman of the Police Authority, Margaret Simey, was there, and she actually raised with Margaret Thatcher the question of democratic control over the police operations. And Margaret Thatcher turned on her and said, "Oh, it's a Lady Simey," she said, "if you ever got that," he said, "it's a recipe for chaos."
And when I said, "But what, in that case, is the point of having a police authority?" she gave me one look, and I'm told it was at that moment she decided, "Going to get rid of this lot."
With racial disadvantage and excessive policing effectively sidelined, Michael Heseltine, then Secretary of State for the Environment, was sent to deal with Liverpool's other problem.
I showed him the unemployment exchange, which was at that time in Leachy Street, and I said there are 60,000 people registered unemployed. That was the area that served Toxteth. I said, it's like your constituency, virtually every single person in your constituency not having a job.
Everywhere he went, Heseltine told people he had come not to impose solutions, but to listen to all sides.
You could argue that he did quite a bit of good on Merseyside too, as well as reducing the tension and improving the situation, and of course, not to put too fine a point on, easing the political pressure upon the government.
Throughout July, the pressure kept mounting as smaller disturbances continued in over 30 towns around the country. After 3 weeks in Liverpool, it became apparent to Heseltine that listening was not enough, and something needed to be done.
He came in here with a view to, we're going to settle a problem, we're going to solve a problem, without actually knowing what they were doing. It resulted in Heseltine planting trees in Liverpool 8, throughout Liverpool 8. Trees everywhere, brilliant. I mean, obviously that's going to stop the riots next time. Trees, you know, probably places to swing on or something, I haven't a clue.
Oh yeah, we've got a set of trees up and down the avenue, haven't you seen them? They planted some trees for us. Oh, 20 years later, the trees are growing quite nicely. Yes, we got trees.
Michael Heseltine said, here's £250,000, do it up. So they brought a bunch of contractors in from Manchester who did up the boulevard. Now that's your first £250,000 that came into the area, but none of it stayed in the area because nobody got jobs out of it here. And that's been the process that's gone on again and again and again.
£50 million was invested in a garden festival centre, built 3 miles from Toxteth. It was Heseltine's attempt to regenerate the area, but in reality, it made little difference to local people.
They poured millions into this to turn it into a nice, lovely garden festival centre with amusement places for children to play. Probably cost you about £3, £4, £5 to get in. It was to no benefit to the communities of Merseyside. It was only beneficial to the banks and the financial advisors and the top management who ran it.
Even as the Festival Gardens Centre neared completion, a local government election was about to change the city's political climate.
Two years after the riots, the Tory government won a landslide victory in the United Kingdom. What did Liverpool do on the very day Thatcher won her huge majority? It elected a militant council.
Militant Labour's victory ended 13 years of Liberal control of the city. Liverpool's black community, traditional Labour voters, had high expectations. But they were to be disappointed by the new politicians who now ran the council.
The position on race that militants began to clearly articulate became increasingly damaging. It started off from a class approach, that there are really no specific problems that the black community face than working class communities in Liverpool face. So you had that class-only approach, which flew in the face of the reality of the additional problems of racism that working class people face, but the problems of racism that black middle class people face, which can be very, very damaging and very real.
The council employed a Londoner, Sam Bond, as their principal race relations advisor. Bond's support for militants' position on race immediately brought him into conflict with local black groups. Within 2 years, the council's leadership was no longer on speaking terms with most of the black organizations in Toxteth.
We were concerned that the black issue didn't become more important than the, if you like, the class issue that we believed in it. And I think that we went over the top on that. We had an idea who we wanted, and the Black Caucus had an idea of what they wanted. We unfortunately went along our line. We caused a split and a division, which was the most unhelpful thing that could have been possible at that moment in time. And if there was one sort of tactical error that if I had my time over again I would change, it would be the appointment of Sam Bond.
The fall of militant Labour signalled a change in Liverpool City Council's thinking on race relations. But for many blacks in Toxteth, there'd be no change in policing policy.
I parked my car on Salisbury Road and a car come around the corner and bumped into my wing, a brand new car. No, the dent was like that. The police took prosecute me for having a dent in my car, yeah? The policeman started to read out of his diary in court. He was coming down Smithdown Road and he seen my car approaching the city centre, and when he stopped me, my car had a dent on it, and how dangerous it was, he's saying to the police. The barrister said to him, "Mister, can I have a look at your diary?" He didn't want to show the barrister the diary. Anyway, the barrister got up and grabbed the diary out of his hand. He said, "There's nothing in this notebook that you're reading, or you're just talking from your head. There's nothing in the notebook." So I'm in a court full of police with the judge and whatever, and he's reading out all that shite, and nothing in it, nothing written in his notebook.
In 1985, Lord Scarman published his report on the riots. His main recommendations included the abolition of the hated sus laws and the introduction of community policing. Community policing was intended to make the police more sensitive to local needs. In Toxteth, it had unforeseen repercussions.
I don't know if the hierarchy within the police took this as a personal insult or blow, but no, in Oxford he probably did. And I can imagine that he said something like, oh, they want community policing? Okay. A buffer zone around Liverpool 8. Within the community, any community, you've got criminal elements. They'd seen a golden opportunity here, so what they were now doing, they were organising themselves where they'd go out, hit a bank, race back to the community. If they were chased by police, youngsters in the community who were still very angry with the police would brick the police and the people would get away. And before long, Liverpool 8 became like a free zone. It was like bandit territory. Anything in there went and no one would touch you.
Focus of policing was very much on a community basis. It was clear to everyone that, you know, we'd have to think very carefully about hard tactics in here. And it provided a shield for certain people to work in what they felt was a safe environment.
We've seen everything when we were kids. There was lots about them. But this was a different kettle of fish. This was people with drugs in abundance, who had access to large amounts of cocaine and heroin and amphetamines. And where did this suddenly all come from?
Subsequent operations quickly meant that some fairly prominent people who at that time were putting themselves forward as community representatives ended up spending long periods in prison.
This change in emphasis towards more proactive policing soon brought some high-profile arrests. Best known among these was Michael Showers, a self-appointed community leader. Showers had been introduced as a successful businessman to Heseltine during his time in Merseyside. In 1991, Michael Showers was jailed for 25 years for importing heroin.
There's no doubt that as years gone on, the commitment to dealing with drugs in that area has never eliminated it, but it's never been a place where people can go with immunity to deal with or deal in or buy drugs.
18 years after the riots, much has changed. The police force has declared that combating institutional racism is now a priority. A war on drugs has now replaced the crackdown on street crime. But much remains the same. Youth unemployment in Toxteth is still running at 50%. Police stop and search figures are on the increase.
All the negative sides that people have spoken to you about the riots is from the establishment's point of view. And the worst thing about it is it's brewing again. People can feel it yet again. More than ever, young black people are being stopped on the streets. More than ever, people are being accosted.
I think it would be a brave person who could say that we would never suffer anything like that again. Each and every time these things happen, people need to learn by the experience and look to see what the causes were and try to avoid them.
You can check out more information